Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, August 2nd, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. It is going to be a hot one in Riverside today, with a high of 100.5 degrees and a low of 70.4 degrees, so please be sure to stay hydrated and take necessary breaks in the shade if you are spending time outdoors. On the show today, we are taking a closer look at the persistent challenges that keep the U.S.-Iran peace agreement in such a fragile state. We will also examine the factors contributing to rising mortgage rates, even as the housing market continues to cool. We have a variety of other headlines to cover as well to catch you up on the day's biggest developments. There is a lot to get through, so stay tuned to Alex's News. Good morning. For months now, we've been tracking the war between the United States and Iran, and today there's a fragile peace framework in play. Ethan joins us with the latest. Ethan, where do things stand?
Good morning, Grace. As we reported last week, this conflict has been escalating fast. But there's a new diplomatic development worth focusing on. President Donald Trump has announced that a memorandum of understanding pertaining to peace has been largely negotiated to end the war. According to PBS NewsHour, via the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, Pakistan played a key role as a mediator. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was the one who actually announced the deal.
Pakistan as the broker. Who else helped bring the two sides together?
Qatar was the other critical mediator, Grace. Iranian state television reported that the agreement followed more than 14 hours of talks in Tehran. So this wasn't a quick handshake, it was grinding, marathon diplomacy. And it's notable that two Muslim-majority nations, not the usual Western players, carried this over the line. That tells you something about how the diplomatic map has shifted during this war.
So what's actually at the heart of this deal?
The primary objective is reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of the world's most vital oil choke points. President Trump confirmed on social media that he authorized removing the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports. Remember, that blockade was originally imposed in retaliation for Iran's control of the waterway. And to sweeten it, the U.S. indicated it would relax sanctions so Iran can sell more oil and try to rebuild its battered economy.
When would all of this actually take effect?
That's where it gets tricky. A signing ceremony was scheduled for a Friday in Switzerland, but Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Kazim Garibabadi stated, via state television, that implementation wouldn't begin until the formal signing. So nothing moves until the ink is dry. According to Mayer, the broader document is a 14-point plan that codifies tenuous ceasefires in both Iran and Lebanon.
You mentioned Iran's frozen assets. What does the deal say about those?
Tasnim reported that the MOU requires the naval blockade to be lifted within 30 days. It also demands the release of at least a portion of Iran's frozen funds in the very first phase. For Tehran, that money is a huge deal, because the economy has been hammered throughout this conflict. And on the ceasefire front, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi emphasized, through Pakistani mediators, that any deal must include the fighting in Lebanon.
Why is Lebanon such a sticking point in these talks?
Because the war there has gotten dramatically worse, Grace. Israel has pushed its invasion deeper than at any point in over 25 years, targeting Hezbollah. So from Iran's perspective, you can't have peace on one front while a proxy war rages on another. Tying Lebanon into the framework makes the whole thing more complicated, but Tehran sees the two as inseparable.
Let's talk about the nuclear question. Is that part of the agreement?
It's actually not, and that's one of the biggest gaps here. According to PBS NewsHour, negotiations over Iran's nuclear program were intentionally deferred to a later date. Senior Pakistani officials indicated broader nuclear talks would continue over the next 60 days, with the possibility of extension. So they essentially set aside the hardest issue to get anything signed at all. That's a common diplomatic tactic, but it leaves a lot unresolved.
And how close is Iran to a weapon right now?
The stakes are genuinely high. The International Atomic Energy Agency reports that Iran possesses 440.9 kilograms of uranium enriched up to 60% purity. That's a short technical step from weapons grade, which is 90%. Iran maintains its program is peaceful, but the U.S. has previously sought the removal or destruction of that uranium. Al Jazeera noted that Secretary of State Marco Rubio reiterated that Tehran must never possess a nuclear weapon.
How's this deal being received back home in Washington?
Not warmly by everyone. Some members of the Republican Party argued the terms don't improve on the 2015 nuclear deal, the one President Trump previously withdrew from. So there's real skepticism that this gives away too much for too little. And keep in mind, deferring the nuclear question is exactly what critics point to as the weakness. They worry it's a pause, not a solution.
And what about the reaction inside Iran itself?
There's turbulence there, too. President Masoud Pezeshkian has urged national unity, and he called it, quote, a disgrace, end quote, for hardliners to label the negotiators as traitors. That tells you the deal is splitting Iran's political establishment. Hardliners see compromise as betrayal, while Pezeshkian is trying to hold the coalition together. It's a delicate balance for him at a very fragile moment.
There's also been a major leadership change in Iran, hasn't there?
Yes, and this is enormous, Grace. The U.S. and Israel launched strikes on February 28th that killed Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, has since become the Supreme Leader. And President Pezeshkian stated that no final decision on the deal could be made without Mojtaba Khamenei's permission. So even with everything negotiated, the ultimate word rests with a leader who only recently took power.
So a deal was reached earlier. What's happened to it since?
This is the heart of today's update. The MOU was signed back on June 17th, and for a moment it offered real hope for peace. But according to reports from CBS News and Crane WW, the agreement has since faced, quote, serious challenges, end quote. Some sources now describe it as having collapsed. That deterioration followed Iranian attacks on commercial tankers in the Strait of Hormuz and subsequent U.S. strikes on roughly 170 targets.
So the fighting never really stopped?
No, it flared right back up. There was a 5-night operational pause, but that was reversed on July 28th after Iran launched ballistic missiles toward U.S. forces in Jordan. That prompted retaliatory strikes by U.S. and Saudi forces in Iraq. Then, between July 29th and 30th, CENTCOM conducted further strikes on IRGC command centers and maritime capabilities. So even as the diplomats talk peace, the militaries keep trading blows.
So is this framework dead, or is there still something to build on?
That's the key question. And honestly, the answer depends on who you ask. Some officials view the Islamabad MOU as collapsed. Others describe it as, quote, intact but fragile, end quote. What most agree on is that it remains the only viable framework for eventual normalization, but it's also seen as an unreliable basis for current operational planning, which is a diplomatic way of saying nobody's betting on it holding.
So where does that leave us as of today?
As of this morning, August 2nd, the conflict remains in a volatile state of transition. You've got a fragile diplomatic framework on one hand and intermittent military escalations on the other. The pieces for peace exist, the mediators are engaged, and the core objectives are on the table. But every time momentum builds, another strike or another tanker attack knocks it back. It's a war that's trying to end, but hasn't quite figured out how.
A genuinely precarious moment. Ethan, thank you for walking us through it.
My pleasure, Grace. We'll keep tracking it closely.
Good morning, everyone. If you've been house hunting lately, you already know it's a tough market out there. Mortgage rates have jumped to their highest levels in nearly a year. Here to break it all down is our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, good morning. Just how high have rates climbed?
Good morning, Grace. So according to data from the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corp., better known as Freddie Mac, the average 30-year fixed-rate mortgage hit 6.66%. That's for the week ending July 30th, just a few days ago. It rose from 6.58% the previous week. NPR reported those figures, and they've become the primary marker for this upward trend.
Now, I've seen a few different numbers floating around. Are the sources actually disagreeing here?
They're in the same ballpark, but yes, there's some variation. Some reports from Simply Wall Street suggest rates as high as 6.85%. The Associated Press noted a benchmark of 6.55%, and Bankrate reported a similar national average of 6.67%. So while the exact figure shifts depending on who's measuring, The Freddie Mac number of 6.66% is the one most people are anchoring to.
That's a big shift, isn't it? Weren't rates actually falling not too long ago?
They really were, Grace. This is a sharp reversal from where we were early in the year. Rates had been falling since last summer, and they eventually dipped below 6% back in February of 2026, so buyers were feeling optimistic. But recent geopolitical instability has completely disrupted that trajectory, and it happened faster than most people expected.
Geopolitical instability. You're talking about the situation with Iran?
Exactly. Specifically, it's the war with Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Those two things together have sent crude oil prices soaring, surpassing $100 a barrel as a U.S.-Iran ceasefire unraveled. And when oil spikes like that, it ripples through the whole economy. NPR noted that the average price for a gallon of regular gasoline rose to $4.10. That's an increase of about $1.11 from before the conflict began.
So help me connect the dots. How does the price of oil end up affecting my mortgage?
It's a great question, and it's not obvious at first. Kara Eng, a senior economist at Zillow, put it simply. She said, quote, "Oil prices always swing mortgage rates," end quote. The idea is that higher energy costs make shipping more expensive and raise the general price of goods across the board. That fuels inflation, and inflation is really the engine driving all of this. So when you fill up your tank for more money, that same pressure eventually shows up in your loan.
And inflation feeds into the bond market too, right? Walk us through that link.
Right, this is the technical heart of the story. Mortgage rates closely track the yield on the 10-year Treasury note. That yield rose to 4.57% recently, up from 3.97% in late February, before the outbreak of war. So you can see the war's fingerprints right there in the numbers. The Associated Press noted the 10-year Treasury yield sat at 4.57% at midday Thursday, and that reflects investors bracing for hotter inflation.
Now the Federal Reserve met recently. What did they decide to do?
The Fed held its benchmark interest rate steady on July 29th, so no change there. But here's the interesting wrinkle, Grace. 3 members of the rate-setting committee actually voted for a hike. That sends a signal to investors that another increase could be coming as soon as September. So even though the Fed didn't move this time, the market is reading between the lines and preparing for the possibility.
That sounds pretty gloomy. Is there any good news for buyers in all this?
There is a potential silver lining, actually. The Associated Press highlighted a recent report showing that consumer prices for gas, clothing, and other goods cooled last month. Hannah Jones, a senior economist at Realtor.com, called that cooler inflation reading a, quote, "step in the right direction," end quote. But she added a warning. She said buyers will keep feeling the pinch until mortgage rates actually decline. So cooler inflation helps, but relief at the closing table hasn't arrived yet.
Let's talk about how all this is landing on the housing market itself. What are we seeing?
The combination of high rates and elevated home prices has really stifled activity. According to the National Association of Realtors, the average existing home sold for over $440,000 in June. That's an all-time high, which is remarkable given how few people are buying. At the same time, sales declined 2.4% compared to a year earlier. So prices are up, but the market itself feels frozen.
Prices at record highs while sales fall. That's a strange combination. What's it telling us?
It tells us the market is what experts are calling tepid. And there's another number worth watching closely. Pending home sales fell 5.4% in June from the previous month. The Associated Press describes pending sales as a, quote, near-term bellwether, end quote, for the market. In other words, it's an early warning sign of where things are heading, and right now it's pointing downward.
Are people at least still applying for loans, even if they're not closing?
Fewer of them are, honestly. The Mortgage Bankers Association reported a 2.7% drop in total mortgage applications last week, and that decline was driven largely by a 7% drop in applications specifically for home purchases. So it's not just refinancing pulling back. It's would-be buyers deciding to wait it out, which really underscores how much these rates are weighing on people's decisions.
What about shorter-term loans? Are those any more affordable right now?
They've risen too, unfortunately. Freddie Mac reported the average 15-year fixed-rate mortgage climbed to 6.04%. That's up from 5.96% the previous week. So even buyers who might normally reach for a shorter loan to save on interest are finding those costs creeping higher as well. There's really no easy corner of the market right now.
So bottom line, Chloe, when might buyers actually see some relief?
A lot of it hinges on what happens overseas, Grace. Housing experts like Kate Wood of NerdWallet suggest investor skepticism and market volatility will likely persist until there's a, quote, decisive, conclusive, end quote, end to the fighting in Iran. So until that conflict resolves and oil prices settle, the pressure on rates isn't likely to ease. For now, buyers are largely playing a waiting game, watching both the headlines and the bond market.
So really, keep an eye on gas prices and the news out of Iran, and you'll have a sense of where mortgages are headed.
That's a smart way to think about it. The connection isn't obvious day to day, but energy, inflation, and the 10-year Treasury are all moving together right now. If we see a genuine, lasting ceasefire, that could bring oil down and cool inflation. And that's the pathway back toward lower mortgage rates. Until then, patience is the name of the game.
Really helpful context this morning. Chloe, thank you so much for walking us through it.
My pleasure, Grace. Happy to help.
That was our reporter, Chloe. We'll keep tracking those rates and bring you updates as the situation develops. Stay with us. Here are some other headlines. Turning to global conflict, things are heating up in Kyiv, where a Russian ballistic missile attack on August 1st has left a trail of tragedy. At least 9 people were killed, including 4 children, and more than 30 others were injured. This marks the second major strike on Ukraine in 48 hours, proving that the situation remains volatile. It seems the conflict is really hitting a breaking point. In a related blow, a Russian drone targeted a Rozetka warehouse in Kyiv Oblast, leaving 1 employee dead and 7 others wounded. Talk about a delivery that no one wanted. In a political plot twist, President Donald Trump walked back an offer to allow Ukraine to produce its own Patriot interceptor missiles just hours before that devastating ballistic strike hit the capital. It looks like the U.S. decided to pull the plug on that production line. But Ukraine is fighting back with some fireworks of its own. On August 2nd, Ukrainian forces struck a Russian airbase in Engels and an oil refinery in Saratov Oblast, really fueling the fire of the counteroffensive. Switching gears to the pitch, FIFA is playing a different game after President Gianni Infantino scrapped a proposal to sell a minority stake in a new private entity called FIFA Forward Enterprises. The organization had hoped to sell a 21% stake to outside investors, with Joshua Kushner's venture capital firm Thrive in the mix, to raise $4.2 billion. The money was earmarked for the FIFA Fast Forward program. Under that deal, member associations who played ball would have received $40 million in the 2027 to 2030 cycle, while those who played hardball would have seen only $20 million. Total development funding would have soared past $10 billion over 4 years. However, the plan hit a wall of opposition from UEFA, CONCACAF, and the Asian Confederation. UEFA threatened a total boycott of FIFA competitions, including the World Cups, if the deal moved forward. CONMEBOL also stepped in, arguing that commercial greed shouldn't overshadow the essence of the beautiful game. On Friday night, July 31st, Infantino admitted the project had created too many divisions and decided to kick the idea to the curb. And finally, in a few quick hits, we are hearing reports of a whaling ship being seized in Iceland, which is certainly a whale of a tale. Meanwhile, in the tech world, Anthropic's new AI model is proving to be a real bug hunter, identifying more software glitches than ever before. Unfortunately, Microsoft is struggling to fix them fast enough, proving that even the biggest giants can get tripped up by a few lines of code. Lastly, we are tracking unverified reports regarding cyber attacks on water systems, a situation that remains fluid as we wait for more details. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.8, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.